So what we're going to do now is create another command handler, and this one's going to be for updating or editing an activity. So I'm just going to head over to Solution Explorer, and I'm just going to close a few things down to clean things up. And inside my application activities folder, I'm going to create another C# class. This one's going to be called edits. And this will give me an opportunity to use my new snippet. So I'm going to start typing in C handler or Chandler and press return. And I'm going to need to import all of the using statements for this. So what I'm going to need to do is on each underline or red squiggle, I'll need to use the quick fix and bring in using mediator. I'll need to do the same for the data context and say using persistence. For the task, I'll need to say using system threading task. And for the cancellation token, I'll need to say using system threading. And for the exception, I'll need to say using system. And this should resolve all of the red underlines inside this file, and it does. And then I'll just reformat to tidy things up. Now for our edit command, what we need inside the body of this, or the body of our request, is going to be all of the properties that we want to allow our user to edit. But we also need to provide the ID of the activity as well. So what we're actually going to have inside our command is going to be literally every property for the activity. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to our activity entity again and just copy all of these properties and just paste them inside my command here. So even though we're obviously not going to let the user edit the ID, we still need access to the ID to identify the activity that we actually want to update in this case. And the rest of the properties we want to allow the user to edit. And what we want to do next, we want to come down to our handler logic, and the first thing we want to do is actually get our activity from the database. So I'm going to say var activity equals await context.activities and just use find async and pass in the request.id to go and get the activity from our database. And we'll need to check here to see if the activity is equal to null. Otherwise we're going to end up getting a null reference exception. And if the activity is null, well, we're still going to pass back an exception at this stage because we haven't dealt with error handling at this time. So for now, we're just going to throw exceptions when we run into a problem. And we'll say could not find activity. And we need to throw an exception here because we need to find a way to stop the execution of this method without returning to our API controller. And one way we can do that is to throw an exception. And what we want to do now is update the properties inside the activity. Now when it comes to updating an activity, the user can either update a single field or update all of the fields inside here. And what we want to do is accommodate that. So what we'll do is we'll say the activity.title is equal to request.title, and we want to allow for the fact that this could be null because they don't have to edit every possible field or even send up every possible field. And what we can use is the null coalescing operator. And what this means is that if this is null, then anything to the right of these question marks is going to be executed. So our activity title is either going to be request.title or it's going to be the activity.title. In other words, it hasn't changed. And we need to do the same for every property here that we're allowing the user to update. So whilst this is a little bit painful at the moment, we don't have any mapping solution added to our project just yet. And that's because we're trying to keep things simple. So what we'll do is we'll just manually add these and say the activity.description is equal to request.description or activity.description. And then we need the activity category. And this is either going to be the request.category or activity.category. Same for the dates. And it's going to be request.dates or activity.dates. And this time we get a bit of a problem because the date field, because it's a type of date time, this is not allowed to be null by default. So what we'll need to do is come up to our date time property, and we'll need to add a question mark here to specify that this is optional. And if we scroll back down, we can see that the error has now gone. And we'll also need to do the same for the city and the venue here. Let's spell venue correctly. And it's going to be request.city or activity.city. And same for the venue as well. Okay, so slightly painful, but this does do the job. And then the rest of this code can stay the same because our activity is being tracked by our context. So when we update any of these properties, then our context, our activity in the context is also being updated. So when we come to save the changes, if this activity has changed, then we'll get success in our success variable here because the integer here will be greater than 0. And if we do get success, then we're going to return a unit.value, and if not, then we're going to get problem saving changes as an exception. What we need to do then is go over to our activities controller and add the method inside there. And this is going to be an HTTP put because we're updating a resource. And in this case, we do need to specify a root parameter for the ID as well. So this is going to be a public async task. Again, we're returning an action results. And again, we're returning just units. In other words, an empty object. And in this case, we're going to call it edit. And we'll say edit.command and commands. And inside here, we're going to say return await mediator.send and commands. However, we also need to specify the ID of the activity as well, and we're getting that from our root parameter. So let's add another parameter to our edit method here, and we'll say GUID ID as an additional parameter. And then what we can do is say our command.id is equal to ID. And then this will be passed across inside our command object that we're sending via mediator. And we should be able to go and test this now, so let's take a look. And if we head over to Postman again, and we take a look at the edit activity, and we take a look in the body that we're sending up here, we can see that we're actually just updating a single field here, just the title in this case, but we're sending up all of the properties in this particular example. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to get the GUID of our activity, and we'll just pick on the one we created earlier called test create activity. And we'll copy the GUID for this, and bear in mind your GUID will definitely be different to mine. So please go ahead and get your particular ID for your newly created activity, and we'll just put this as the parameter in the URL here. And if we click on send, then in fact we're going to be updating two fields on this occasion. The activity date is going to be updated, as well as the updated text inside here. So I'm just going to click on send, and we get a 200 OK. And if we take a look at our activity again, and we go and send this particular request, then we can see that our test activity is now test create activity updated. What we should also find is that we can remove all of these other properties, or any of the properties, and if we just send up a single field, and I'm just going to say test create activity updated again, we won't actually remove any of the other properties due to the way that we've created our edit handler. And if I click send, we'll find we get the 200 OK again. And if I go ahead and get the activity, then we'll find that we've still got the activity in here with all of its fields, and we've just changed the title in this particular case. So now we've got the ability to update a resource. What we need to do next is take a look at the deletes. And we'll add another command handler to handle the delete request. And we'll look at that next.